All right, now let's implement a stack class. So class stack. Now internally, I'm going to use an array to store the objects in this stack, but I want to keep that array private. I don't want it to be accessible from the outside because I want the consumers of the stack to only use the push and pop methods. If they have access to that internal array, they can always access the objects in the stack using their index. But as I told you before, in a stack, we should not be able to access objects using their index. Now, if this sounds confusing to you, you really need to take a course on data structures and algorithms. And as I told you before, I'm planning to create a course on this topic in the near future. So here I'm going to add a constructor to initialize that internal or private array. To implement a private property, I'm going to use a weak map. So on the top, let's define a constant called underline items and set it to a new weak map. Now here in the constructor, we're going to add an empty array in this weak map. So underline items.set, the key is this object and the value is an empty array. So later we'll use the get method to get access to this array to add objects to it. Okay, so now let's add the push method. Here we pass an object. Now we need access to this array here. So we call items.get, pass this. Now we have the array, so we call the push method, and this will always add an object to the end of the array. So object. Very simple, one line of code. Now the pop method. We don't have any arguments here. First, we need to check if the stack is empty or not. So if, one more time, underline items that get this, that length is 0, we're going to throw a new error. Stack is empty. Otherwise, we should remove this object from the top of the stack. So underline items that get this. Now we have the array. All arrays in JavaScript also have a pop method that removes the object at the end of the array. So we call that and simply return the result. Now to remove this duplication, we can refactor this code and store this array in a constant in this method. So let's add a constant called items and we set this to this expression here. And this simplifies our code a little bit. So finally, we call the pop method on the items array. Okay. Now the peek method. So peek, once again, I'm going to define a constant items and set it to underline items that get this. First, we check if the stack is empty. So if items that length is 0, we're going to throw a new error. Stack is empty. Otherwise, instead of removing an object, we're just going to return the object on the top. So return items of items that length -1. Very simple. And finally, the count property. Count is a read-only property. We should not be able to set it from the outside. So that's where we use a getter. And as you learned in this section, defining getters in classes is very easy. So get count, that's our count property. We simply return underline items that get this. That returns our private array. So we simply return its length. So that's our stack exercise.